The telegram slipped from Katherine Hartley's trembling fingers, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird, as the words "arrangements have been made" echoed in her mind with the finality of a coffin lid closing. It was 1876, and at 20 years old, she had just learned her fate was sealed: a marriage to a man she'd never met, 3,000 miles from the only home she'd ever known. The small Massachusetts town where Katherine had spent her entire life suddenly felt both suffocating and precious. Since her parents' deaths from influenza the previous winter, her uncle had made it clear she was a burden. "You'll be Mrs. Everett Blackwood by summer's end," Uncle Thomas announced, retrieving the telegram from the floor with obvious satisfaction. "A wealthy cattle rancher in Wyoming Territory. Consider yourself fortunate. Most orphaned girls with no dowry don't receive such opportunities." Katherine stared out the window at the familiar oak tree where she'd spent countless childhood hours reading. "I don't even know this man. He's 45, established, and willing to take you despite your circumstances." Her uncle's voice carried the unmistakable tone of a man completing an unwanted obligation. "The train ticket arrives next week. You leave in a fortnight." That night, Katherine slipped out to the stables, finding comfort in the presence of Maple, her chestnut mare. The smell of hay and leather had always calmed her, even in the darkest moments following her parents' deaths. "We're going west, old girl," she whispered, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "Though I doubt Uncle Thomas will allow me to bring you." The thought of leaving Maple behind felt like another death, another piece of herself abandoned. "Talking to horses again, Miss Katherine." The voice startled her, though she recognized it immediately. Daniel Foster stepped from the shadows, hat in hand, his tall frame silhouetted against the lantern light. He'd worked her family's stables since they were teenagers, and in the months since becoming her uncle's reluctant ward, he'd been her only true friend. "Daniel, you startled me." She quickly wiped away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "My apologies." He moved closer, his weathered face showing concern. At 24, Daniel had the eyes of someone who'd seen more of life than his years suggested. "I heard about Mr. Blackwood's telegram," Katherine sighed. "News travels quickly, small towns." He leaned against the stall door. "So, Wyoming." "Apparently so, to a stranger old enough to be my father." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I've been thinking about heading west myself." Katherine looked up sharply. "You have?" He nodded slowly. "There's not much left for me here. My brother's working cattle drives out of Cheyenne, says there's good work for men who know horses." His eyes met hers. I could go ahead, scout things out before you arrive." Something fluttered in Katherine's chest, not hope exactly, but perhaps the shadow of it. "Why would you do that?" Daniel's calloused fingers fidgeted with the brim of his hat. "Because you deserve better than being shipped off like cargo to a man you've never met." He cleared his throat. "And because I care what happens to you, Miss Katherine." For the first time since receiving the telegram, Katherine felt she could breathe. "When would you leave?" "End of the week. The morning stage." His voice grew softer. "I could write to you, let you know what to expect. I'd like that." Katherine reached through the stall slats, her fingers briefly touching his. "And Daniel, out west I think I'll just be Katherine, no miss necessary." His smile was small but genuine. "Katherine then." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Katherine packed her modest belongings and said goodbye to the few friends she had left. Daniel had departed as planned, leaving her feeling strangely hollow despite their brief acquaintance as anything more than mistress and stable hand. The morning of her departure arrived with gray skies and a persistent drizzle. Uncle Thomas escorted her to the station with obvious relief, handed her the ticket and a small purse of traveling money, and made his perfunctory goodbye. "Your fiancé will meet you at the Cheyenne station," he reminded her. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you on Tuesday next." Katherine nodded, clutching her small valise, watching her uncle's retreating back with a curious lack of emotion. As the train's whistle sounded, she realized she was truly alone for perhaps the first time in her life. The journey west transformed the landscape outside Katherine's window, from the familiar green hills of New England to vast prairies that seemed to stretch forever beneath an impossibly large sky. At night, she read Daniel's first letter by candlelight, delivered just before her departure. "Wyoming is nothing like Massachusetts," he'd written. "The land feels like it could swallow you whole, but there's a freedom here I've never known. Cheyenne is growing fast, a proper city rising from nothing. I've secured work at McClintock's livery. Your Mr. Blackwood is known here. His ranch lies 2 days' ride northwest. They say he's fair in business but keeps to himself. I'll learn more." The letter was signed simply, "Yours, Daniel," and Katherine found herself tracing those words with her fingertip, wondering at their meaning. 5 days later, as the train pulled into Cheyenne, Katherine's stomach knotted with anxiety. She gathered her belongings, straightened her travel-worn dress, and stepped onto the platform into the bright Wyoming sunshine. The station bustled with activity: cowboys, businessmen, families, and railroad workers, creating a cacophony unlike anything in her quiet Massachusetts town. She scanned the crowd for a man who might be Mr. Blackwood, though she had no idea what he looked like. Instead, her eyes found Daniel, leaning against a post at the far end of the platform. He stood straighter when he spotted her, and Katherine felt a rush of relief so powerful her knees nearly buckled. "You're here," she said as he approached, taking her valise. "I said I would be." His eyes took in her appearance with concern. The journey was hard, just long. She glanced around nervously. "Is Mr. Blackwood here?" Daniel's expression changed slightly. "No, he sent word he couldn't make it. There's trouble at his ranch. Rustlers took some cattle. He's arranged for you to stay at the Wainwright Hotel until he can come for you, likely in 3 days' time." Katherine wasn't sure if she felt relieved or insulted. "I see. I took the liberty of securing your room already." Daniel offered his arm. "And I thought you might like to see a bit of Cheyenne before you meet your fiancé." The way he hesitated over the word made Katherine study his face more carefully. There was something he wasn't telling her. "What is it, Daniel?" He guided her through the crowded street, past saloons and mercantiles. "Nothing that can't wait until you've rested. The hotel's just ahead." The Wainwright Hotel was the tallest building Katherine had ever entered, 3 stories of frontier elegance with actual glass windows, and a dining room that served proper Eastern food, according to the proud proprietor who welcomed her. Daniel arranged to have her bags taken up, then promised to return that evening. "There's a restaurant nearby that serves decent food," he said. "Better than the hotel, truth be told. I'll come for you at 6 if that's acceptable." Katherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the noise, the journey, the uncertainty of her future. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." His eyes softened. "Rest now, we'll talk tonight." The hotel room was simple but clean: a brass bed, washstand, small writing desk, and a window overlooking the bustling Main Street. Katherine washed the travel dust from her face and arms, changed into her second-best dress, and lay down, intending only to rest her eyes. She woke to knocking several hours later, the sun already low in the sky. Daniel stood outside her door, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and what appeared to be new trousers. His dark hair was damp and combed neatly, and Katherine realized with a start that he was handsome in a way she'd never allowed herself to notice before. "I'm sorry if I woke you," he said. "No, I'm glad you did." She reached for her shawl. "I'm famished." The restaurant was small but welcoming, with checkered tablecloths and a stove that kept the spring evening's chill at bay. They were seated at a corner table, and for the first time, Katherine felt the strangeness of dining alone with a man who wasn't family. "This isn't proper," she said suddenly, as a waitress placed bowls of stew before them. Daniel's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Wyoming has different standards than Massachusetts, Katherine. Women dine alone with men, ride horses astride, and some even own businesses." He broke a piece of bread. "The territory gave women the vote 4 years ago." Katherine's eyes widened. "Truly, truly." He took a spoonful of stew. "This place isn't what you're expecting in many ways." Something in his tone made her set down her spoon. "Tell me what you've learned about Mr. Blackwood." Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "He's wealthy, as your uncle said, owns 10,000 acres and nearly as many cattle, employs 20 men year-round, more during spring roundup." He paused. "He's also buried 2 wives already." Katherine felt a chill despite the warm room. How did they die? The first in childbirth 12 years ago, the second from fever 3 years past. Daniel's eyes met hers directly. He has a reputation as a hard man, Katherine, fair in business, as I wrote, but cold. His ranch hands respect him but don't particularly like him. And you learned all this in 2 weeks. Men talk freely in saloons, especially when they don't know who's listening. He took a drink of water. There's more. He's not 45 as your uncle claimed, he's closer to 55, and the agreement he made with your uncle. Daniel's jaw tightened. There was money exchanged, more than just your travel expenses. Katherine's appetite vanished. He bought me, in effect. Daniel's voice was gentle. I'm sorry. Why are you telling me this now? She fought to keep her voice steady. The train leaves daily. I could have returned east. And gone where? His question wasn't cruel, just practical. Back to an uncle who sold you, to a town where you have no home, no parents, no means of support. Katherine stared at the cooling stew. Then what choice do I have? Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. You could stay in Cheyenne. I've spoken with Mrs. McClintock at the livery. Her sister runs a dress shop and needs help. The pay is modest, but there's a room above the shop. You could support yourself. Hope flared briefly before reality extinguished it. And when Mr. Blackwood comes for me, what then? I have a signed agreement. An agreement your uncle made, not you. Daniel's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then withdrew. Katherine, I won't pretend it would be easy. But there are good people here who would help you. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you do this for me? We barely knew each other in Massachusetts. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, vulnerability replacing certainty. I've watched you for years, Katherine. Your kindness to every creature, your quiet strength after your parents died, how you'd read books under that old oak tree completely lost to the world. He looked down at his hands. I never spoke up because of who we were, you the daughter of my employer, me just a stable hand. But here we're just two people trying to make our way. Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs. No one had ever spoken to her this way, seen her so clearly. Daniel, the restaurant door banged open, cutting off her words. A large man in an expensive coat strode in, scanning the room until his eyes landed on their table. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and something cold settled in Katherine's stomach as he approached. Miss Hartley, he said, not a question but a declaration. I'm Everett Blackwood. Daniel stood immediately, his posture tense. Mr. Blackwood, we weren't expecting you until I handled the rustlers more efficiently than anticipated. Blackwood's eyes never left Katherine's face, assessing her like livestock at auction. You'll come with me now, Miss Hartley. I've rooms at the Cattleman's Hotel more suitable than this establishment. We'll depart for the ranch tomorrow. Katherine felt paralyzed, the room suddenly airless. Daniel spoke before she could find her voice. Sir, Miss Hartley has had a long journey. Perhaps morning would be better for introductions. Blackwood finally turned to look at Daniel, his gaze dismissive. And you are, Daniel Foster. I'm an acquaintance from Massachusetts. I see. Blackwood's tone suggested he saw entirely too much. Well, Mr. Foster, I appreciate your concern for my fiancé, but it's no longer necessary. He turned back to Katherine. Your belongings have already been moved to the Cattleman's, shall we? It wasn't a request. Katherine stood on shaky legs, the evening's revelations still spinning in her mind. She looked at Daniel, whose face had gone carefully blank, though his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Foster, she said formally, knowing Blackwood was watching, and for your assistance upon my arrival. Daniel nodded stiffly. My pleasure, Miss Hartley. As Blackwood led her from the restaurant, his hand proprietary on her elbow, Katherine cast one last glance at Daniel. He stood motionless by their abandoned table, watching her go, and she felt something precious slipping away before she'd even recognized its worth. The Cattleman's Hotel was ostentatious compared to the Wainwright gilded mirrors, velvet drapes, and a lobby where men in expensive suits mingled with fashionably dressed women. Blackwood secured her in a private parlor while he arranged matters at the front desk. We'll dine in my suite, he informed her upon returning. More privacy. Alarm must have shown on her face, for he added, You'll have your own room, of course. I'm not uncivilized, Miss Hartley. We'll be married properly at the ranch by a minister I've arranged to travel from Laramie. When? The question emerged as barely a whisper. Sunday next gives us time to reach the ranch and make necessary preparations. He studied her with those cold eyes. Your uncle's letters described you accurately. You'll do well enough. Catherine's cheeks burned at the assessment. Mr. Blackwood, I think perhaps your thoughts aren't required at present, Miss Hartley. His tone remained conversational, but something in it stopped her words cold. You'll find I'm a reasonable man, but I expect obedience. Your comfort at the ranch will depend largely on how quickly you adapt to that understanding. Dinner was a stilted affair of expensive food that Katherine barely tasted. Blackwood spoke at length about his ranch, his business interests, the house he'd built the finest within 100 miles, and his expectations for their marriage. Katherine was to manage the household, entertain business associates when required, and provide sons to inherit what I've built. He asked nothing about her interests, her family, her hopes. When she attempted to speak of Massachusetts, he waved a dismissive hand. The past is of no consequence now. You're to be a Western woman, Mrs. Blackwood. Best to embrace it fully. After dinner, he showed her to a connecting room where her valise waited. Rest well. We leave at first light. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. The journey to the ranch takes 2 days. I've arranged for proper traveling clothes to be delivered in the morning. That Eastern finery won't serve you on the trail. When he finally left, Katherine sank onto the bed, trembling. The enormity of her situation crashed over her. Married within days to this cold stranger, taken to an isolated ranch, expected to bear his children. Her uncle's betrayal felt complete, selling her like chattel to a man who viewed her as little more than breeding stock. She moved to the window, looking down on Cheyenne's main street. Somewhere out there was Daniel, who had offered her another path, impossible though it seemed. The thought of him brought unexpected tears. In just 2 days, he'd shown more care for her welfare than Blackwood likely would in a lifetime. A knock startled her from her thoughts. Warily, she approached the door, fearing Blackwood's return. Instead, a young maid stood outside with a folded note. For you, miss, the girl whispered, pressing it into Katherine's hand before hurrying away. Katherine unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. K. McClintock's livery, dawn tomorrow. A choice if you want it. Dee's sleep eluded her that night as Katherine paced the confines of her gilded cage. Blackwood's suite was on the 3rd floor, the window offering no escape. The connecting door to his room was locked from his side's small mercy, but she knew morning would bring a future she could scarcely bear to contemplate. Daniel's note burned in her pocket. A choice. But what choice did she truly have? To run from Blackwood meant becoming a woman alone in a frontier town, dependent on the goodwill of people she barely knew. To stay meant security, however cold and confining. As the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, Katherine made her decision. She changed into her simplest dress, repacked her valise, and slipped from the room. The hotel was quiet, only a sleepy clerk at the front desk who barely glanced up as she passed through the lobby, claiming a need for early morning air. The streets of Cheyenne were awakening as Katherine hurried toward McClintock's livery, her heart pounding with each step. What if Daniel wasn't there? What if this was a terrible mistake? The livery's wide doors stood open, the smell of hay and horses familiar and comforting. Katherine hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. You came. Daniel emerged from a stall, leading a saddled maple. Katherine gasped. My horse? How? I arranged for her transport before I left Massachusetts. He stroked the mare's neck. Couldn't bear the thought of her being sold to strangers. The gesture undid her completely. Tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks as she moved forward to embrace her beloved horse. I can't believe you did this. I hoped you might need her. Daniel's voice was careful, neutral. Have you decided, Katherine? She wiped her tears, straightening her shoulders. I can't marry him, Daniel. I'd rather face uncertainty than certainty with that man. Relief washed over his features. Mrs. McClintock is expecting you. The room above the shop isn't much, but it's yours for as long as you need it. And when Blackwood discovers I'm gone, by then, you'll be established as a working woman in Cheyenne, not a runaway bride. Daniel handed her Maple's reins. Wyoming women have rights Massachusetts women don't. He can't force you to marry him here. Katherine studied his face in the growing light. Will you be in trouble for helping me? Nothing I can't handle. His smile was reassuring, though something in his eyes suggested otherwise. Come, I'll take you to the shop now before the town fully wakes. They walked side by side through the quiet streets, leading Maple between them. The dress shop was on a side street, modest but well-kept, with living quarters visible above. A plump, gray-haired woman waited in the doorway. This must be our Katherine, she said warmly. I'm Martha McClintock. My sister tells me you're in need of shelter and work. Katherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. I can sew reasonably well, Mrs. McClintock, and I learn quickly. That's all I ask, dear. Martha glanced at Daniel with knowing eyes. The stable for the horse is around back. I'll get Katherine settled. Daniel nodded. I should return to the livery before I'm missed. He turned to Katherine. I'll check on you this evening if that's all right. Please do. She reached for his hand, squeezing it briefly. Thank you, Daniel. For everything. He held her gaze for a long moment. Be safe, Katherine. The dress shop was closed on Sundays, giving Katherine a full day to settle into her new quarters, a simple room with a narrow bed, washstand, and small table beneath a window overlooking the street. Martha proved to be a kind-hearted widow, whose matter-of-fact acceptance of Katherine's situation was deeply comforting. Half the women in Wyoming came here running from something or someone, she said, as she showed Katherine the workroom behind the shop. We don't ask too many questions. You do your work, pay your rent, and your business is your own. By evening, Katherine had arranged her few belongings and helped Martha prepare a simple supper. They were just finishing when a knock came at the back door. Daniel entered, hat in hand, his expression tight with concern. Blackwood's men are searching the town, he said without preamble. He's offering $50 for information on your whereabouts. Katherine's hand flew to her throat. What do we do? Nothing yet, Martha said calmly. My shop has a reputation for discretion. No one will look for a runaway bride in a respectable dressmaker's. Daniel nodded. Still, it would be best if Katherine remains inside for a few days, and we should consider a more permanent solution. What kind of solution? Katherine asked. Blackwood's influence reaches far in these parts. As long as you're an unmarried woman who broke a marriage contract, some might feel justified in returning you to him. Daniel's eyes met hers. A married woman, however, would have a husband's protection. Martha made a small sound of agreement. He's right, dear. A wedding ring changes everything in the eyes of the law. Katherine stared at them both. You're suggesting I marry someone else? Who? The silence that followed was answer enough. Daniel's gaze remained steady on hers, waiting for her to understand. You, she whispered. You're offering to marry me. For protection only, he said quickly. It would be a marriage in name, nothing more. When Blackwood loses interest and moves on, we could arrange matters differently if you wished. Katherine's mind reeled. Daniel, I can't ask you to sacrifice. It's no sacrifice, he interrupted, then flushed slightly. That is, I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. Martha rose from the table. I'll leave you two to discuss this privately. Daniel, there's coffee on the stove if you want it. She patted Katherine's shoulder as she passed. Consider carefully, dear. It's a practical solution to an immediate problem. When they were alone, Katherine studied Daniel's face in the lamplight. Why are you doing all this for me? He poured himself coffee, seemingly grateful for the distraction. I told you before. I've watched you for years, known what kind of person you are. He took a careful sip. And I couldn't stand by and watch you be treated as property by a man like Blackwood. That explains helping me escape. It doesn't explain offering marriage. Daniel set down his cup with deliberate care. No, it doesn't. He met her eyes directly. The truth is, I've cared for you since we were 17 and you nursed that orphaned foal day and night in your father's stable. You sat on the hay-covered floor reading aloud from Black Beauty because you thought the foal would find the story comforting. The memory washed over Katherine, the tiny foal, Daniel bringing her blankets and food during her vigil. I never knew you noticed. I noticed everything about you, Katherine, but who I was, who you were, it didn't allow for more than noticing. He ran a hand through his hair. Out here, we're just two people. I'm offering marriage because it solves your immediate problem, yes. But I'd be lying if I said there weren't deeper feelings involved. At least on my part. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. The Daniel before her now was different from the quiet, stable hand she'd known in Massachusetts, more confident, more direct. Or perhaps he'd always been this man, and she'd never been able to see past the boundaries of their stations. If we did this, she said carefully, what would it mean, practically speaking? We'd find a justice of the peace tomorrow. I'd continue working at the livery, you at the dress shop. We'd live separately for now, propriety's sake, and because I have only a small room at the livery myself. His voice softened. As I said, it would be a marriage in name only until you decided otherwise, if you ever did. Katherine stood, moving to the window. Below, Cheyenne's evening activity continued, cowboys heading to saloons, shopkeepers closing up, families walking home from church suppers. A world so different from everything she'd known. I barely know you, she said, not unkindly. Daniel remained seated, giving her space. I know. And I'm asking you to trust me with your future based on very little evidence that you should. It's an impossible position I've put you in. Katherine turned to face him. Not impossible, just unexpected. She took a deep breath. If we did this, if we married, I would want it to be a real marriage, Daniel. Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually. I won't live a lie, even to escape Blackwood. Something kindled in Daniel's eyes, hope, carefully banked. I would want that too, more than I can say. Then my answer is yes. The words felt momentous, irreversible. Yes, I'll marry you. Daniel stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Katherine Hartley, he said softly, I promise to be a good husband to you in whatever way you need me to be for as long as you'll have me. And I promise to try to be a good wife, she replied, though I'm not entirely sure what that means out here in Wyoming. His smile was warm, transforming his face. We'll figure it out together. They were married the next morning by a frontier judge who asked few questions and accepted Daniel's story that they were childhood sweethearts recently reunited. Martha served as witness, beaming approval as they exchanged simple vows and rings hastily purchased from the mercantile. Mrs. Foster, Daniel said afterward, the name sounding strange and wonderful on his lips. Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It doesn't quite feel real yet. It will. He touched her cheek briefly. I have to return to work, but I'll come this evening. We should be seen together around town. Make sure word reaches Blackwood that you're a married woman now. That evening, Daniel escorted Katherine to dinner at the hotel restaurant, deliberately choosing the Cattleman's where Blackwood was known to dine. They entered with heads held high, Katherine wearing her plain gold band prominently. Halfway through their meal, the restaurant door opened, and Everett Blackwood himself entered with two companions. His gaze swept the room, freezing when it landed on Katherine. Fury transformed his features as he strode toward their table. Miss Hartley, he hissed, looming over them. What is the meaning of this? Daniel stood, his posture relaxed but alert. Mr. Blackwood, I believe you've met my wife, Katherine Foster. Blackwood's face purpled. Wife, this woman is promised to me. I have a contract with her uncle, not with Katherine herself, Daniel said evenly. And as of this morning, she's my lawfully wedded wife. The documentation is filed with the territorial court. Several diners were watching the confrontation with interest. Blackwood seemed to realize he was creating a scene and lowered his voice. This isn't over, Foster. His cold gaze shifted to Katherine. And you'll regret this deception. Katherine met his stare without flinching. There's no deception, Mr. Blackwood. I've made my choice freely. Blackwood's jaw worked as he struggled for control. We'll see how free your choice feels when winter comes and you're living in squalor with a common stable hand. He straightened his jacket. Enjoy your marriage. He stalked away, rejoining his companions with a few harsh whispers that sent them all toward the exit. Katherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Are you all right? Daniel asked, retaking his seat. She nodded. Yes, though I don't think he's finished with us. Probably not, but he can't legally separate us now. Daniel covered her hand with his. We've bought time, at least. The next week established their new routine. Katherine worked at the dress shop during the day, discovering she had a natural talent for the detailed finishing work Martha's wealthier clients demanded. Daniel came for her each evening, and they dined together at various establishments around Cheyenne, cementing their status as newlyweds in the public eye. They parted each night at the door to her room above the shop, Daniel's goodbye growing increasingly reluctant. On the seventh night, Katherine found herself equally unwilling to see him go. "Would you like to come in?" she asked impulsively. "For coffee, I mean." Daniel's surprise was evident, but he nodded. "I'd like that." They sat at her small table, talking long into the night about their childhoods, their dreams, the people they'd been in Massachusetts and who they might become in Wyoming. Daniel spoke of his hopes to someday own his own ranch, Katherine of her love for books and learning. "I brought so few with me," she lamented. "Just my mother's Bible and a volume of Tennyson's poetry." "Cheyenne has a lending library," Daniel told her. "Small but growing. I'll take you there Saturday." It was well past midnight when Daniel finally rose to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "Katherine, I know our arrangement was unusual, but these past days with you have been the happiest of my life." She felt the truth of his words resonate within her. "For me as well." Daniel stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "May I kiss you good night, as your husband?" Katherine's heart fluttered. "Yes," she whispered. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss gentle and brief, yet it left her breathless. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Good night, Katherine. Good night, Daniel." After he left, Katherine touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Their marriage might have begun as a practical solution to an immediate problem, but something real was growing between them, something that made her heart race, and her mind imagine possibilities she'd never dared consider before. 2 weeks into their marriage, Daniel arrived at the shop with news. "I've found us a place," he announced, his eyes bright with excitement. "A small house on the edge of town, 2 rooms but sound construction. The owner's moving to California and needs to sell quickly." Katherine's heart leapt. "You want us to live together, properly." "If you're ready for that," he said carefully. "I don't want to rush you, Katherine." She thought of their nightly partings, how each grew more difficult than the last. "I'm ready, more than ready." Daniel's smile was brilliant. "Then I'll make the arrangements. We can move in next week." The little house was indeed small, a main room with a cook stove and table, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and bureau. But to Katherine, who had never had a home that was truly her own, it was perfect. They moved in on a Saturday, Martha and her brother helping transport Katherine's few belongings while Daniel brought his own meager possessions from the livery. By evening, they were alone in their new home. Katherine prepared a simple supper, hyper-aware of Daniel's presence as he built a fire against the spring evening's chill. They ate by lamplight, conversation stilted for the first time since their marriage. "I can sleep in here," Daniel said finally, gesturing to the main room. "Until." "Well, until you're comfortable with other arrangements." Katherine set down her fork. "Daniel, when I agreed to make this a real marriage, I meant it fully." She gathered her courage. "I'm nervous, yes. But I don't want you sleeping on the floor when there's a perfectly good bed we're meant to share." Daniel's eyes darkened. "Are you certain, Katherine? I meant what I said. I'll wait as long as you need." She stood, offering her hand. "I'm certain." That night, Katherine discovered the sweet tenderness of Daniel's love, how carefully he undressed her, how reverently he touched her, how completely he made her feel cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms, she marveled at how fate had brought her west to a marriage she dreaded, only to find a husband beyond anything she could have imagined. "I love you, Daniel Foster," she whispered against his chest. "I think perhaps I've been falling in love with you since that night in my uncle's stable." His arms tightened around her. "I've loved you for years, Katherine, watching you from afar, never dreaming I could hold you like this." He kissed her forehead. "You are the greatest blessing of my life." Spring turned to summer, and their small house became a true home. Katherine continued working at the dress shop, saving every penny alongside Daniel's livery wages. They had a dream now land of their own, a small ranch where Daniel could raise and train horses, something they'd begun to believe might actually be possible in a year or two. Blackwood remained a shadow over their happiness. They heard rumors he was still bitter about Katherine's betrayal, still making occasional inquiries about the Fosters in town. But he'd taken another prospective bride from Denver, according to gossip at the dress shop, and Katherine allowed herself to hope he'd forgotten them. In late August, as summer's heat began to wane, Katherine woke one morning with a familiar nausea that confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. She was with child. The knowledge filled her with joy and trepidation in equal measure. She waited until evening to tell Daniel, watching his face transform with wonder as he absorbed the news. "A baby," he said, kneeling before her chair to place his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked. Needlessly, his radiant expression was answer enough. Beyond words, he gathered her into his arms. "I'll work harder, save more. Our child will have everything we can provide." The months that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. Her pregnancy progressed without complications, and Martha insisted she take more rest, reducing her hours at the shop but maintaining her wages, "Because I'll need you back full-time after the little one comes, and I can't risk losing my best seamstress." Daniel took on extra work, exercising wealthy men's horses for additional pay. Each night, he would talk to Katherine's growing belly, telling their child stories about the horses they would ride together someday, the adventures they would have. Winter arrived early, bringing heavy snow in November that blanketed Cheyenne and isolated outlying ranches. Katherine, now 5 months along, found herself increasingly housebound as Daniel insisted she avoid the treacherous, icy streets. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one evening as he built up the fire against the bitter cold. "Humor me," he said, kissing her forehead. "I worry about you both." The following day, Daniel left for work before dawn as usual. Katherine busied herself with mending and reading, watching occasional snowflakes drift past the window. By mid-afternoon, she was restless enough to consider bundling up for a brief walk to the dress shop, just for company. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting Martha with promised knitting patterns, Katherine opened it without hesitation and found herself face to face with Everett Blackwood. "Mrs. Foster," he said, his voice as cold as the wind behind him. "May I come in? I believe we have unfinished business." Fear froze Katherine in place. "Mr. Blackwood, my husband will be home soon." "No, he won't." Blackwood pushed past her into the house. "Your husband is currently occupied at my ranch 15 miles from here. An emergency with a valuable horse, quite urgent. He left immediately." Katherine's blood ran cold. Daniel would never have gone that far without telling her, especially in this weather. "I don't believe you. Believe what you like." Blackwood removed his gloves, looking around their modest home with undisguised contempt. "So this is what you chose over me, poverty with your stable boy." Katherine backed toward the kitchen where a heavy skillet sat on the stove. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwood?" "Justice." He advanced on her. "I paid good money for you, made arrangements, was humiliated when you ran." "I was never yours to buy," Katherine said, her hand closing around the skillet handle. "Please leave my home." Blackwood laughed without humor. "After I came all this way, I think not." His eyes narrowed. "You're with child, I see. How convenient for establishing the legitimacy of your hasty marriage." Katherine lifted the skillet. "Leave now, or I'll scream loud enough to bring every neighbor running." "There's no one to hear you," Blackwood said calmly. "This pathetic excuse for a house is too far from others. And your neighbors are at the town meeting about the railroad expansion. Everyone's there, except you. And me." Fear surged through Katherine as she realized he was right. Daniel had mentioned the meeting that morning. She hadn't connected it to the unusual quiet outside. "What do you want from me?" She asked again, her voice steadier than she felt. Blackwood's expression hardened. "Originally, to frighten you, to make you understand the consequences of crossing me." His gaze dropped to her swollen belly. "But now I find myself curious about a different kind of justice. Your husband took what was mine. Perhaps I should return the favor." Katherine swung the skillet with all her might as he lunged forward, catching him on the shoulder. He roared with pain and anger, knocking the implement from her grasp. Katherine turned to run, but he caught her arm, spinning her around. "You'll pay for that," he growled. The door burst open with a crash, frigid air sweeping into the room. Daniel stood in the doorway, face contorted with fury, a pistol aimed directly at Blackwood's chest. "Take your hands off my wife," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Blackwood released Katherine immediately, raising his hands. "Foster, this isn't what it appears. It appears you've broken into my home and put hands on my pregnant wife." Daniel stepped forward, the pistol unwavering. "Give me one reason I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now." Katherine moved quickly to Daniel's side. "He said you were at his ranch, that he'd lured you away." "I was at the livery the whole time." Daniel's eyes never left Blackwood. "Mrs. McClintock saw him heading this way and came to warn me." Blackwood's composure cracked. "You can't shoot me, Foster. I'm an important man in this territory. You'd hang." "Maybe." Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. "But you'd still be dead." "Daniel, no." Katherine placed her hand on his arm. "He's not worth it. Our baby needs you free, not in jail." For a tense moment, Daniel seemed beyond reason, his rage a palpable force. Then slowly he lowered the gun. "You're right." He refocused on Blackwood. "You have 10 seconds to leave my property. If I ever see you near my wife again, I won't hesitate, important man or not." Blackwood straightened his coat, trying to salvage his dignity. "This isn't over. 5 seconds." Daniel cut him off. With a final venomous glare, Blackwood stormed out into the snow. Daniel slammed the door behind him, immediately turning to Katherine. "Did he hurt you? The baby?" His hands hovered over her, afraid to touch, afraid of what he might discover. "We're fine." Katherine guided his palm to her stomach, where their child chose that moment to kick vigorously. "See." Just frightened. Daniel pulled her into his arms, his body trembling with residual fear and anger. "I nearly lost you both." "But you didn't." She held him tightly. "You came in time." That night, as they lay in bed, Daniel's arms protectively around her, Katherine voiced the fear they both shared. "He won't stop, will he? Not until he's had his revenge." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "No, I don't think he will. Not as long as we're in Cheyenne." "Then we should leave," Katherine said simply. "Start fresh somewhere he can't find us." "And go where?" Daniel asked. "We've built a life here, Katherine. Your work, my position at the livery, our savings toward our own place, none of that matters if we're not safe." She placed her hand over his where it rested on her belly. "This is what matters, our family." Daniel sighed against her hair. "You're right, but winter's the wrong time to travel, especially in your condition. We'll wait until spring, after the baby comes, make preparations quietly." Katherine agreed, though unease lingered. They both knew Blackwood wasn't finished with them, but for now they had weathered the storm. The remainder of winter passed without further incident, though Daniel rarely left Katherine alone after Blackwood's intrusion. He arranged his work schedule to match her hours at the shop, escorting her back and forth despite her insistence that she could manage. "Humor me," became his constant refrain, and Katherine found she couldn't deny him this small peace of mind, not when she saw the worry that never quite left his eyes. As February turned to March, Katherine's time grew near. Her movements slowed, her body heavy with the child that now kicked and rolled constantly beneath her heart. "Active," Daniel commented one evening, his hand spread across her belly. "Like a young colt, or a daughter determined to dance," Katherine countered with a smile. They had agreed not to state preferences for a son or daughter, both insisting any healthy child would be a blessing beyond measure. Katherine's labor began on a clear March morning, the first truly warm day of the approaching spring. Martha came immediately, bringing the midwife from her church, and Daniel was banished to pace the main room while the women took charge of the bedroom. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as evening fell, Katherine delivered a healthy daughter with a powerful set of lungs and a shock of dark hair like her father's. "Daniel," Martha called, opening the bedroom door. "Come meet your daughter." He entered almost timidly, his usual confidence vanished at the prospect of this tiny new person. Katherine sat propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle in her arms. "She's perfect," Katherine said, pulling back the blanket to reveal the infant's face. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and your chin." Daniel knelt beside the bed, overwhelmed. "She's so small, but strong," the midwife assured him. "Good lungs on that one." Katherine placed the baby in his arms, showing him how to support her head. Daniel's large hands, so capable with horses, trembled as they cradled his daughter. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your pa." Tears filled Catherine's eyes as she watched this man who had risked everything to save her from a loveless fate, now holding the miraculous result of their love. "What shall we call her?" Daniel asked, not taking his eyes from his daughter's face. Catherine had been considering names for months, but in this moment, only one seemed right. "Hope," she said softly, "because that's what you gave me, Daniel. Hope for a future I never dreamed possible. Hope Foster." He tested the name, smiling as the baby's tiny fingers curled around his thumb. "It's perfect, like her." The weeks following Hope's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Catherine had never known such exhaustion or such joy. Daniel proved himself an attentive father, rising for night feedings when he could, singing old stable songs to soothe the colicky baby. April brought true spring, and with it, renewed discussions of their plans to leave Cheyenne. Blackwood had been quiet through winter's end, but rumors reached them that he'd been asking questions about the Fosters again, particularly about their new daughter. "We can't wait much longer," Daniel said one evening as they sat on their small porch, Hope sleeping against Catherine's shoulder. "I've been making inquiries. There's land available near a town called Sheridan, north of here. Growing place, good water, fewer big ranchers throwing their weight around." Catherine nodded. She'd miss Martha and the security of her position at the dress shop, but the thought of raising Hope under Blackwood's threatening shadow was unbearable. "How soon could we go?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. "I need to secure a wagon, supplies, and there's the matter of funds." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Catherine recognized as concern. "The land I want us to have, it costs more than we've saved." Catherine considered this. "Martha's brother mentioned he might buy Maple for his daughter. I've been reluctant to sell her, but no." Daniel's response was immediate. "Maple stays with us, she's family." He smiled at Catherine's surprised expression. "We'll find another way. I've been offered a job driving a herd north to the Sheridan area. It pays well enough to make up what we need. How long would you be gone?" 3 weeks, give or take." He took her hand. "I hate to leave you in Hope, but it solves our financial problem neatly." Catherine squeezed his fingers. "We'll manage, and when you return, we'll be ready to start our new life." Daniel left 2 days later, after extracting promises from Martha's brother to check on Catherine and Hope daily. The separation was harder than Catherine had anticipated. Their small house felt cavernous without Daniel's presence, the nights endless without his warmth beside her. Hope proved to be her salvation, demanding constant attention that left little time for worry. The baby grew and changed daily, her dark eyes tracking movement, her tiny hands reaching for Catherine's face during feedings. "Your pa will be so surprised when he sees how you've grown," Catherine told her daughter as they rocked on the porch 2 weeks into Daniel's absence. "He'll be home any day now." A shadow fell across them, and Catherine looked up, expecting Martha with her promised delivery of fresh bread. Instead, Everett Blackwood stood at the edge of her yard. Fear coursed through her as she clutched Hope tighter. "Mr. Blackwood, my husband isn't home. I'm well aware." He remained where he was, making no move to approach closer. "Your husband is still 2 days from Cheyenne, according to my sources." Catherine stood, backing toward the door. "What do you want?" To deliver a message. Blackwood's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "I'm leaving Wyoming, moving my operations to Montana territory." Bigger opportunities there. Confusion replaced some of Catherine's fear. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand something, Mrs. Foster." He adjusted his expensive hat. "I could have destroyed you both at any time, your husband, you, now your child. It would have been simple." A cold smile touched his lips. "But I've decided you're not worth the effort. Your marriage is punishment enough." Catherine's confusion gave way to anger. "My marriage is the greatest blessing of my life, Mr. Blackwood. If you came here hoping to wound me with your contempt, you've failed." Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "You've changed, Miss Hartley. Wyoming has hardened you." "Foster," she corrected. "Katherine Foster." "And Wyoming hasn't hardened me, it's shown me my own strength." Blackwood studied her for a long moment. "Well then, Mrs. Foster, consider this our final conversation. I won't trouble you again. See that you don't." Catherine surprised herself with her boldness. "Safe travels to Montana, Mr. Blackwood." He tipped his hat, a gesture so formal it bordered on absurd under the circumstances, then turned and walked to his waiting horse. Katherine watched until he rode out of sight, her heart gradually slowing its panicked rhythm. Looking down at Hope, still peaceful in her arms, she whispered, "Your pa was right about Wyoming women. We're made of stronger stuff than Massachusetts girls." Daniel returned 3 days later, bursting through the door with a shout of joy that startled Hope into wailing protests. He gathered them both into his arms, apologizing between kisses for his extended absence, marveling at how much the baby had grown. "You seem different," he said later as they sat together watching Hope sleep in her cradle. "More settled somehow." Katherine told him about Blackwood's visit, watching Daniel's expression darken with anger, then clear with relief. "You believe him? That he's truly leaving us be?" Katherine nodded. "Oddly, yes. I think he finally saw me as a person, not a possession." And he realized that pursuing his vendetta further would only make him appear petty and small. Daniel drew her closer. "I would have preferred to be here to protect you. I protected myself," Katherine said with quiet pride, "and hope." His smile was warm with love and admiration. "So you did, Mrs. Foster. So you did." They left Cheyenne 2 weeks later, their wagon packed with everything they owned, which wasn't much, and Hope nestled in a cradle Daniel had crafted from an apple barrel. Maple pulled the wagon, seeming to understand the importance of their journey, while Daniel rode alongside on a sturdy gelding he'd earned as partial payment for the cattle drive. Katherine felt a pang as they passed the dress shop, Martha waving tearfully from the doorway. But as Cheyenne faded behind them and the vast Wyoming landscape opened before them, that pang was replaced by a mounting excitement. "Tell me again about our land," she called to Daniel over the wagon's creak. His face lit up as it always did when discussing their future. 20 acres to start, with an option for 20 more once we're established. Good water from a year-round creek. Enough flat ground for a proper house and barn, with rolling hills perfect for grazing horses. He grinned at her. "And only a half-day's ride from Sheridan, so you can sell your fancy needlework to the rich ladies in town. And you'll train the finest horses in the territory," she added, entering into their familiar dream. "Gentled the Foster way, not broken. That's the plan." He reached across to touch her cheek. "Are you happy, Katherine?" "Truly." She looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the wagon's jostling, then at the man who had risked everything to offer her a choice when she believed she had none. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "I came west promised to a man I'd never met, dreading my future. Instead, I found you the man I'd known all along without truly seeing." Daniel's eyes shone with emotion. "I'll spend my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I already know I won't," Katherine said, smiling as Hope stirred and began to fuss for attention. "Our adventure is just beginning, Daniel Foster, and I can't wait to see where it leads us." As the wagon rolled northward beneath Wyoming's endless blue sky, Katherine marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just 1 year. She had arrived a reluctant bride-to-be, sent west like a package to be claimed. Now she traveled freely, a wife and mother bound for land of her own, her future shaped by love rather than obligation. The cowboy she knew had indeed given her reason to stay, but more importantly, he had given her the courage to create a life worth living, out here in this wild, beautiful country that was beginning to feel like home.